My name is Alice, and on that particular evening as I stepped into the restaurant, the warm golden light glinting elegantly off each crystal wine glass, I knew instantly with a chilling certainty that I was not welcome. The rehearsal dinner for my sister-in-law Clarissa's wedding was being hosted at an upscale Italian restaurant commanding a breathtaking view overlooking the Hudson River. Everything appeared to be perfectly meticulously arranged, from the lush ivory peony bouquets adorning each table to the soft, ambient piano music wafting through the background. Except for one glaring intentional detail, there was no seat allocated for me. I stood in the middle of the grand reception hall, feeling utterly invisible like a ghost at a feast. A few of the assembled guests gave me cursory once-overs, their eyes lingering for a moment before flicking away almost as if I were a misinformed server who had unfortunately shown up at the wrong time or place. I scanned the room for a name board, hoping for some indication, but found nothing. On the long, imposing table, draped in luxurious silk, were exquisitely handwritten name cards, elegant and practically dripping in overt favoritism. Mine, conspicuously, was not among them. Clarissa then rose from her prominent position at the head of the table, her champagne-colored satin dress hugging her perfectly sculpted body as if it were tailor-made for that very smug, self-satisfied moment. She held her wineglass aloft and glided towards me, her voice an unsettling concoction of syrupy sweetness and the sharp cutting edge of a well-honed blade. "Alice, oh my gosh, you actually came!" she exclaimed, feigning surprise. "We've only reserved seats for the people who are actually participating in the ceremony, you understand." A few quiet, knowing chuckles rippled through the group seated behind her, mostly friends of my husband's affluent family, from the high-stakes finance world, the kind of people who clearly preferred the opaque jargon of investment banking over genuine eye contact or human connection. I turned my gaze to Ethan, my husband, who was positioned by the bar, conversing casually with his parents. He didn't look at me. Not a single glance in my direction, not one tentative step towards me. He simply raised his glass in a toast to an older gentleman in a pinstripe suit and laughed as if I weren't being subjected to a very public, very deliberate humiliation just a few feet away. "Do you want me to repeat the invitation details for you?" Clarissa continued, tilting her head slightly with an air of condescension. "I'm quite sure you understand that this is intended to be a family-only gathering." I felt my spine stiffen, a cold, hard rhythm beginning to thud in my chest. I had endured Clarissa's subtle cruelties for 3 long years, the disdainful side eyes, the fake compliments invariably laced with hidden biting insults. But this time she had orchestrated her attack in front of both our families. And Ethan, my husband, just stood there, callously acting as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. I managed a small, tight smile, keeping my composure steady and calm. "Of course. Perhaps I should just go and freshen up a bit." I turned away, the sharp tap of my heels against the polished marble floor echoing in the suddenly quiet room. No one attempted to stop me. No one inquired if I needed anything. But deep inside me, something fundamental shifted in that moment. I didn't actually leave the party. I just stepped outside onto the balcony, which overlooked the dazzling panorama of New York City glowing beneath the vast, indifferent skyline. The cool night breeze brushed gently against my cheek, snapping me out of the disoriented haze that had enveloped me. I opened my clutch, retrieved my phone, and sent a short, concise message. No fluff, no repetition, no unnecessary emotion. That single message was the ignition switch for a sequence of events that Clarissa couldn't possibly begin to imagine. 6 days after that humiliating rehearsal dinner, I walked confidently into the annual Harper Foundation Gala, a highly prestigious event that consistently gathered nearly all of the East Coast's social and financial elite. The party this year was held at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, beneath dazzling, opulent crystal chandeliers, with chamber music so perfectly curated and impeccably performed it might as well have been synchronized to the fluctuating stock portfolios of the distinguished guests in attendance. Clarissa was one of the co-hosts for the gala this year. She wore a striking, deep red gown that clung to her figure like a second skin, much like her own ambition, accessorized with a diamond bracelet substantial enough to reflect light across the entire expansive room. Beside her stood her father, Charles Whitaker, the formidable chairman of Whitaker Holdings, the fourth largest real estate firm in the country. He was also the man who had always treated me like a tacky, undesirable accessory that his son Ethan had mistakenly and regrettably brought home. But on that particular night, the most important individual present wasn't Clarissa, nor was it Charles. It was Franklin Hawthorne, the gala's main sponsor, and the legendary, almost mythical CEO of Hawthorne Group, a venture capital firm managing billions of dollars in rotating investments across the United States. I knew Franklin wasn't there merely out of goodwill or philanthropic sentiment. He was the type of calculating individual who never even stepped out of a limousine without knowing exactly whose hand he would be strategically shaking at the far end of any given room. And I also knew with absolute certainty that Clarissa was aggressively gunning for the coveted communications director position at Hawthorne's charitable foundation, a role she often referred to as the last golden ticket to definitively cement her status as a modern woman of the century icon. Around 8 o'clock that evening, Clarissa gracefully took the stage, lifting a delicate glass of champagne. The room immediately fell into an expectant silence. I'd like to extend my deepest, most heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Franklin Hawthorne. She began, her voice as sweet and cloying as chocolate ganache, yet with a spiky, unsettling aftertaste. What an incredible honor it is to have you here with us tonight. The investment eagle, as Forbes once so aptly called you, the eye that never sleeps. A few scattered polite chuckles rippled through the audience. Clarissa smiled, a picture of poised elegance, and then, with calculated precision, she twisted the proverbial knife. I used to think that rather intimidating nickname simply meant you were always remarkably alert. But now I'm beginning to think perhaps you just don't need sleep at all. With the sheer number of companies Hawthorne Group managed to acquire just last year, I sincerely doubt you've had much time to even nap. The temperature in the room seemed to visibly drop several degrees. Franklin offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile, but his eyes remained cold and unamused. Oh, and of course, Clarissa added, seemingly oblivious, with vision as sharp as yours, who else could possibly have bought out an entire hospital system and so brilliantly transformed it into a chain of luxury wellness spas? No one laughed this time. There was only the soft, awkward clink of a forgotten glass against a plate. I caught Charles Whitaker's eye from across the room. His face had gone deathly pale, his fingers gripping his wineglass so tightly they had turned white. Franklin Hawthorne then stood up abruptly. He walked away from his table without uttering a single word. Clarissa probably thought she was dazzling the room with her New York Times-worthy wit, but she had just committed an act that even seasoned Wall Street veterans deeply feared, publicly mocking the formidable Franklin Hawthorne. I felt a distinct chill run down my spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was the profound, certain moment I knew the cracks in their carefully constructed facade had finally started to appear. Soon after that disastrous speech, I slipped out into the hallway with the only person present at that gala who ever made me feel entirely like myself. Natalie Hawthorne, Franklin's daughter and my very best friend since our college days. Unlike her powerful father, Natalie genuinely despised these ostentatious galas. She was only there that night out of a sense of familial obligation. She seriously thinks that little performance scored her points, doesn't she? Natalie whispered to me, her tone laced with a dry, biting sarcasm. I remained silent, observing. My dad is never going to forget this, she added, her voice low and conspiratorial. He's been actively looking for a legitimate reason to cut all financial ties with the Whitakers for months now. Clarissa just handed him one on a silver platter. I looked at her, seeking confirmation. Are you sure? Natalie nodded emphatically. He called his legal team the second he left that room. Trust me on this, Alice. That wedding, there will be no honeymoon. They'll be spending their supposed romantic break desperately trying to plug catastrophic stock leaks. I glanced back inside the ballroom. Clarissa was still smiling, looking as smug and self-satisfied as if she had just successfully won a high-stakes bidding war. She had absolutely no idea that her ill-advised toast was merely the first shot fired in a rapidly escalating war, And this time, I wasn't going to be the one just passively taking all the hits. I was ready. I used to believe I would never become the kind of person who meticulously plotted revenge. I believed in karma and standing back and allowing the world to naturally balance itself out. But 3 long, arduous years as a Whittaker daughter-in-law had taught me a harsh, undeniable lesson: the world doesn't always balance itself. The most skillful manipulators are often the very ones who write the rules only to then brazenly break them behind your back when it suits their purposes. After the gala, while Clarissa was still basking in what she mistakenly perceived as press praise for her witty speech, I sat alone in my small private office on the 34th floor, the only sanctuary in our home that remained untouched by my mother-in-law's invasive influence. Displayed on my computer screen was the intricate financial structure map of Whittaker Holdings, a detailed web I had quietly, painstakingly compiled over the past year. It revealed a tangled network of subsidiaries, numerous stock-backed loans, and a series of incredibly risky exclusivity deals, all precariously tied to substantial capital from the Hawthorne Group. Clarissa was likely consumed with thoughts of next week's wedding rehearsal, envisioning elegant gowns, perfectly scented candles, and sophisticated cocktail menus. For me, however, it was all about precise strategic timing. I pulled out my phone, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the profound, unshakable knowledge that this single call was about to change everything. "This is Alice Whittaker, Ethan's wife," I said clearly as Franklin Hawthorne's deep, resonant voice came through on the other end of the line. "I sincerely hope I'm not calling too late, Mr. Hawthorne." "It's never too late when something truly interesting is involved, Ms. "Alice!" he replied, his tone betraying a clear note of surprise. "What can I do for you?" I took a deep, steadying breath. "I know you are currently considering pulling your considerable investment from Whittaker Holdings." A pregnant silence hung on the line. "I'm not calling to try and stop that from happening." I continued, my voice even. "In fact, I'm calling to ask if I were to provide you with a compelling, irrefutable reason to accelerate that process. Would you be willing to act decisively right before Clarissa's rehearsal dinner next Friday?" On the other end of the line, Franklin Hawthorne let out a low, dry laugh completely devoid of any actual humor. "I always suspected you were smarter than you let on, Alice. But I must admit I didn't expect you to be quite this strategic." "I don't need recognition, Mr. Hawthorne," I replied, my voice unwavering. "What I need is for you to act at precisely the right moment." There was another long pause. Then he said, his voice now all business, "I'll instruct my legal team. And you should be aware if this goes forward as you propose, there will be no taking it back. The consequences will be significant." "I'm not looking to take anything back, sir," I stated simply. I then hung up the phone, my hand resting for a moment on a thick folder prominently labeled Whittaker Confidential. Every single page within that folder represented a painful piece of my life over the past few challenging years. The constant humiliation, the casual dismissal, the deeply unsettling way I was consistently looked through as if I were merely a shadow and insignificant appendage in their grand family tree. I used to stay silent primarily for Ethan's sake because I mistakenly believed he wasn't truly like the rest of them. But that fateful night when Clarissa had so deliberately and publicly erased my name from the seating arrangement at the rehearsal dinner, and Ethan had just stood there passively observing, smiling with a martini in his hand, I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that I had been utterly, completely alone in that family for far too long. 2 days later, I met Natalie at a small, unassuming cafe in Soho. She had traded her usual power blazer for a soft cream turtleneck and a stylish charcoal scarf. But the sharp, intelligent glint in her eyes, that same unmistakable look one would expect from the daughter of a legendary, formidable investor, was still very much present. "He's already spoken with the board," Natalie stated bluntly as soon as we were seated. "The funds will be officially pulled at exactly 8 p.m. on Friday, right when Charles is scheduled to take the stage for his speech." I nodded slowly. That was indeed the night of the fateful rehearsal dinner. Charles Whitaker would be standing in the center of the grand ballroom in front of the assembled media, numerous business partners, and presumably close family friends, arrogantly boasting about a supposed strategic alliance between Whitaker Holdings and a new powerful investor. A deal he fervently believed would relaunch his flagging empire after 2 consecutive years of disastrously bad investments. "He trusts you, you know," Natalie added, her voice low and thoughtful. "And as for me, well, Alice, I think you're both incredibly dangerous and utterly brilliant." I didn't smile. For the very first time in many, many years, I truly felt like I was finally in control of my own story, my own destiny. Clarissa had absolutely no idea that by choosing to publicly humiliate me in such a callous manner, she had inadvertently created the one enemy she could never have possibly predicted. Someone quiet, someone exceptionally patient, and someone biding their time waiting for precisely the right moment to act. And that Friday night, beneath the glittering, ostentatious lights, and amidst the celebratory clinking of crystal wine glasses, a brand new chapter was about to begin. Not the storybook bride chapter Clarissa had envisioned, but the dramatic, unavoidable first act of a crumbling, once mighty empire. The very next morning, the top headlines splashed across every major financial outlet screamed the news: Whitaker Holdings plummets, golden alliance dissolves into thin air. Clarissa and Alexander's wedding, the opulent event that had been relentlessly hyped across every conceivable media platform for weeks on end, was unceremoniously canceled by noon that same day. There was no formal press release, no public apology issued, just a short, terse email sent out to the invited guests, with the stark subject line, "Tomorrow's ceremony will no longer proceed as planned." The sprawling Whitaker estate in Long Island, which had once been decked out in extravagant anticipation with a massive wedding tent, hundreds of elegant Tiffany chairs, and even a specially commissioned ice fountain, now looked more like an abandoned, desolate construction site. The event staff had apparently shown up before sunrise to dismantle absolutely everything. I stood on the second-floor balcony of our home, looking out over the backyard. Clarissa sat motionless on a solitary white plastic chair, still clad in her silk robe. Her hair was loosely, almost carelessly tied back, and her eyes were visibly swollen from a severe lack of sleep and far too many shed tears. But I knew with an intuitive certainty that she wasn't crying over lost love. Clarissa had always loved power, not the man who was supposed to have been beside her at the altar. And on this particular morning, she had catastrophically lost both. Later that night, Ethan came home, still faintly smelling of old wine and palpable confusion. He closed the front door gently, saying nothing. We sat across from each other at the large kitchen table, the silence stretching long and uncomfortably between us. Eventually, he was the first to speak. "I just don't get it, Alice. What exactly just happened?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I think you more than anyone should know the answer to that, Ethan. Your family played with fire for far too long, and eventually they got burned." Ethan sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair, his eyes betraying his exhaustion. "Clarissa. She's completely spiraling. She's lost all her sponsorships, the media has entirely pulled their coverage of her and the wedding, and all the fashion brands that had eagerly sent over designer dresses have now pulled out. Even the diamond jewelry she so ostentatiously flaunted at every opportunity has been recalled. It turns out most of it was actually purchased using company accounts, not personal funds." I said nothing in response. I just quietly poured more tea into his cup. "My dad," Ethan continued, his voice flat, "is being summoned for an internal hearing. There are serious insider trading suspicions. Apparently, he mortgaged most of his personal shares just weeks before this collapse. The board has at least temporarily removed all of his executive authority." Ethan spoke as if he were narrating a detached documentary, as if these events had nothing directly to do with his own family. I recognized the signs of shock. He hadn't yet fully comprehended where he himself stood amidst all this rubble. "Did you know this was going to happen?" he asked slowly, his voice containing no blame, just a sincere, searching question. I looked down at the teacup cradled in my hands, then answered softly, almost like a breath escaping my lips. I knew they would eventually pay a price. How steep that price would ultimately be, however, was entirely their own choice to make. A long contemplative silence passed between us. Ethan then nodded, his eyes still distant and unfocused. "It's strange," he mused. "You're nothing like anyone else in this family. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only reason I still love you." I looked up at him then. In his eyes, I saw something entirely new. Something I hadn't seen there before. Not fear, not disappointment, but a burgeoning respect. For the very first time in all my years within the Whitaker household, I wasn't being judged based on where I came from or what school I had attended. In that moment, I was simply the one who had chosen to stand up at precisely the right moment, and in doing so had not lost her essential self-worth. In the days that immediately followed, the bad news continued to hit the Whitaker family like a relentless cascade of falling dominoes. The main Manhattan office of Whitaker Holdings was seized by the bank due to massive unpaid debts. The opulent penthouse apartment where Clarissa had once frequently filmed her popular lifestyle vlogs was summarily repossessed. She subsequently wiped her entire social media presence clean after many of her so-called friends and followers abruptly unfollowed her, hastily deleted any group photos featuring her, and then proceeded to give exclusive, rather unflattering interviews to various tabloid magazines, uniformly stating that Clarissa was never truly genuine. Then came an unexpected call from Natalie. She invited me to lunch at a small, discreet restaurant in Brooklyn. When I arrived, she placed a small navy velvet box on the table between us. "This is from my father," she said simply. "He wanted you to have it. He said this is a small reward for the only person in the entire Whitaker family who actually understood the intricacies of the market." I opened the box. Inside lay a beautiful silver fountain pen, its nib intricately etched with delicate patterns. On the inside of the cap, a single poignant phrase was elegantly engraved: "Patience is a kind of wisdom." I smiled and tucked the pen carefully into my coat pocket, not because I particularly needed a tangible reward, but because I knew with a deep sense of affirmation that this was the final, and perhaps the only recognition that truly mattered to me. 3 weeks after Whitaker Holdings officially declared bankruptcy, I returned to the sprawling Long Island mansion one last time. The house, which had once been perpetually filled with the scent of fresh flowers, the sparkle of crystal glasses, and the cheerful sounds of frequent brunches and social gatherings, was now eerily empty, hauntingly still. All the valuable artwork had been taken down from the walls, the extensive wine cabinet stood bare and collecting dust, and the only sound now echoing through the once grand halls was the mournful shuffling of movers carrying out the last remnants of a fallen dynasty. Upstairs, I found a heavy mahogany box neatly placed in a corner of Clarissa's former bedroom. Inside were the jewels she had once so proudly used to cement her elevated social status. Gleaming black Tahitian pearl necklaces, an ostentatious 8-carat emerald ring that had once been prominently featured in Harper's Luxe magazine, and the infamous sapphire earrings that had caused such a stir at that memorable Hamptons gala. I lifted each piece, feeling not the weight of the precious metals themselves, but the symbolic weight of what they had once represented: a world built upon a precarious foundation of arrogance, pervasive deceit, and cold, calculating ambition. I didn't keep any of them. Instead, I brought the entire collection to the headquarters of the HopeWorks Foundation, a reputable scholarship fund dedicated to helping underprivileged children gain access to better educational opportunities. When I handed the weighty box over to the CEO of the foundation, she looked at me in utter disbelief. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Ms. Whitaker? Each one of these pieces could easily fetch 6 figures, possibly more, at auction." I simply nodded. "Please use them to create something that actually truly matters in this world." A week later, I received a heartfelt thank you letter from the foundation. The pieces, they informed me, would be prominently featured in their upcoming spring charity auction. For the very first time, these jewels wouldn't be worn behind the closed doors of exclusive parties or used as mere symbols of status. They would be placed in the public spotlight no longer representing elitism, but instead symbolizing hope and opportunity for those in need. Ethan and I subsequently moved out of our luxurious Manhattan apartment and into a more modest two-story red brick home located in a quiet neighborhood in Brooklyn. There was no concierge service, no gleaming brass elevator, just a small, manageable yard, a few potted plants on the stoop, and the cheerful, everyday sound of children biking happily down the street. And yet, in this simpler setting, I felt more profoundly at peace than I ever had before. Ethan officially resigned from his position at Whitaker Holdings shortly after the company was formally dissolved. He was then offered a teaching position at a private business school in Brooklyn. Not a glamorous role by any means, but it was enough to make him genuinely smile each morning as he walked out the door to begin his day. As for me, I began this process of rebuilding my own career, not in anyone else's imposing shadow this time, but from the ground up, and for the very first time truly and authentically on my own terms. I called Natalie. I'm thinking of starting an independent financial consulting firm. I told her as we sat at our usual corner cafe, one that focuses on transparency, ethical practices, and actively supporting small, deserving businesses. Natalie tilted her head, her eyes immediately lighting up with interest and support. The very next day, I received an email from Lambert Enterprises Franklin Hawthorne's company. The sender was simply listed as FH. The message was brief, but impactful. I believe in intentional beginnings. My door is always open to those who choose to forge a different, more principled path. Horizon Strategies was officially born that February, a name Ethan had thoughtfully come up with, signifying the importance of always looking forward towards a brighter future. Our first office consisted of just 4 dedicated people, 2 rather worn recycled wood desks, and a notably noisy coffee machine. But I had never seen a space more palpably full of hope and potential. Natalie, now officially the CEO of Lambert Enterprises after her father Damon Franklin had stepped into the role of chairman, was the very first to sign a strategic partnership agreement with us. Lambert Enterprises certainly didn't need new partners, but they chose us for one fundamental reason. They too believed in conducting business, rooted in real, tangible values, not in manipulation or deceit. Under Natalie's capable leadership, Lambert Enterprises entered a new era, quieter perhaps, but also deeper, more human-centric, and ultimately more sustainable. Meanwhile, Horizon Strategies began steadily earning the trust and business of family-owned enterprises, innovative tech startups, and various nonprofit organizations. Entities that had long been ignored or undervalued by the traditional financial world, which was so often dominated by established and sometimes ruthless names like Whitaker. One day, I asked Natalie somewhat reflectively, "Do you genuinely think we're doing the right thing here by not playing the same old games that the established financial world seems to thrive on?" She just smiled knowingly. "Alice," she said, "sometimes truly changing the world begins with simply refusing to blindly follow its outdated, often flawed rules." That night, I sat on our tiny second-floor balcony watching the streetlights flicker softly below a warm cup of tea cradled in my hands. Ethan came up quietly behind me and gently draped a thick knitted cardigan over my shoulders. "You've got that important meeting with the micro-investment group tomorrow, right?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, they manufacture specialized toys for children on the autism spectrum. So far, no one has been willing to lend them the capital they need, but I truly believe they deserve a fair shot." Ethan smiled. "If anyone understands precisely how to give deserving people a genuine chance at exactly the right moment," he said, his voice filled with affection, "it's definitely you." A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of the nearby trees. I looked up at the dark, expansive sky. There were no stars visible that night, but it felt completely, utterly peaceful. Approximately 3 months after Horizon Strategies officially launched, I received an entirely unexpected call from an international number. When I picked up, I heard the unmistakable voice of Charles Whitaker. It was lower now, raspier than I remembered, and surprisingly almost entirely stripped of its former arrogance. "Alice, thank you for picking up my call." His voice was hesitant. "I'm not calling to ask for anything at all. I just wanted to say I was wrong. Profoundly wrong." I said nothing in response, not out of any residual anger, but primarily out of genuine surprise. This was, after all, the same man who had once looked at me as if I were the single unsightly stain on his family's otherwise perfect, pristine portrait. "I'm living with my brother up in Vermont now," he continued, his voice quiet. "I'm doing some freelance consulting work, writing strategic reports for a few small startups. They have no idea that I once ran a billion-dollar global company. They just see an old man who hopefully listens well." His voice hesitated for a moment, then he added, "I thought I had taught Clarissa everything she needed to know to succeed in this world, but I realize now I never taught her how to lose gracefully. And then she lost in the hardest way imaginable. Now she's trying to start over." I had in fact heard some news about Clarissa. After being completely cut off by her former friends and abandoning all her social media platforms, she had apparently been sent to a rather exclusive finishing school in Lausanne, Switzerland, a place renowned for training heiresses in the finer points of poised discretion and perhaps most tellingly silence. Not everyone would understand the implications of such a move, but I did. For someone like Clarissa, it was tantamount to a psychological sentence, a form of profound exile. Charles sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Alice, but if someday in the future you ever think I might be worth it, just let me know." The call ended in a heavy silence, but for me it provided a quiet, unexpected sense of closure. There was no lingering resentment, no outstanding debts to be settled, just the image of a man slowly learning how to step down from his self-constructed throne, finally on his own 2 feet. That spring, Zoe Natalie sent a wedding invitation to Ethan and me. The ceremony took place in a small, intimate garden at the Museum of Modern Art, the very place where they had first met during a charity fundraiser years before. There was no ostentatious ball gown, no intrusive drone cameras filming every moment, just an intimate, heartfelt gathering of genuinely close friends under the canopy of blooming cherry blossoms. Zoe wore a simple, elegant white silk dress, holding hands with James, a literature professor at NYU, whom she had once happened to sit next to at a cultural symposium. There were no prenuptial agreements in sight, no powerful investors looking for a return on their social capital. Just honest, gentle glances exchanged between two people who had likely never expected to find each other in a city as famously loud and overwhelming as New York. Ethan and I sat in the second row next to Damon Franklin Hawthorne, now officially retired from the relentless spotlight of high finance, but still as sharp-eyed and astute as ever. As Zoe reached the end of the aisle, I heard him whisper almost to himself, "For the first time in my entire life, I believe I'm investing in something that doesn't actually require a tangible return." Ethan gently held my hand under the table. Without a single word needing to be spoken between us, I knew exactly what he was thinking. We had weathered the storm together, not to simply return to what was, but to discover a new, stronger version of us, one entirely free from the oppressive shadow of Clarissa, unburdened by the immense pressure of the Whitaker name. Just us. When the party began to wind down, Zoe pulled me aside into a quiet corner of the garden. "I still have the letter you sent me last year," she said softly. "The one where you wrote that you wanted to somehow change how the world treats those who are often seen as not good enough." She paused, then smiled. "You did it, Alice. You really did." I chuckled softly in response. "Not quite, perhaps, but I've certainly learned that I no longer need anyone else to define me or my worth." Zoe then handed me a small, beautifully wrapped box. Inside was a delicate necklace with a tiny, intricately designed compass pendant. "To remind you," she said warmly, "that the right direction isn't always clearly marked on someone else's map." Later that night, as Ethan and I returned to our home in Brooklyn, a light rain had just begun to fall. We stood by the window for a while, watching the droplets collect and trace paths down the cool glass. Everything felt remarkably still, incredibly peaceful. Ethan placed a comforting hand on my back. "You know something, Alice," he said reflectively. "I never truly thought I'd be happy walking away from that old world, from all that supposed prestige. But because of you, because of your strength and clarity, I've learned how to genuinely begin a new, more authentic chapter." I smiled and rested my head contentedly on his shoulder. I don't need fame. I don't need constant applause or external validation. What I have now, and what I actively choose to hold on to, is a life that is above all real. A life where I don't have to ask for anyone else's permission to simply exist. A life where I can build good, meaningful things in my own way, on my own terms. And if someone ever asks me what I did to change everything in my life, I'll simply say this: I patiently waited for exactly the right moment, and then I didn't miss it. My story didn't commence with inherited power or predetermined social status. It began with many silent, often painful years of being consistently overlooked and undervalued. But within that very silence, I learned to keenly observe, to patiently wait, and ultimately to reclaim my intrinsic worth with unwavering clarity and firm resolve. Today, I live a life that is not defined by the imposing name on a gilded gate, but rather by the genuine values I strive to create and uphold each and every day. Justice in my case was eventually served not with loud pronouncements or dramatic confrontations, but with the quiet, indomitable strength of someone who knows deep in her core that she no longer has anything left to prove to anyone. What are your thoughts on Alice's choices and on the profound transformation of those who once so casually looked down on her? Share your insightful opinions in the comments section below. And please don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional, unexpected, and ultimately inspiring family stories.